Captain Alexander Blackwood had earned his reputation as the most disciplined guard in the history of the royal palace. For 15 years, he had stood watch over the royal family without ever breaking protocol, never showing emotion, and never ever disobeying a direct order from his superiors. His fellow guards whispered that he was made of stone rather than flesh and blood. At 35 years old, Alexander commanded the elite royal protection, a unit with military precision that impressed even the most senior palace officials. He had served in 3 different wars before taking his position at the palace, and his record was spotless. Kings had tried to engage him in casual conversation during long ceremonial events, but Alexander maintained perfect professional distance. High-ranking nobles had attempted to bribe him for small favors, but he remained incorruptible. The palace. Staff often joked that Captain Blackwood would probably salute a tree if it wore the right uniform and gave him an order. He followed the chain of command with religious devotion, and his loyalty to duty was legendary throughout the kingdom. But there was one member of the royal family who had never tried to test his resolve. Princess Isabella, the youngest daughter of King Edmund. At only 8 years old, she was known throughout the palace for her wild imagination, endless questions, and complete disregard for royal protocol when it suited her. While her older siblings had learned to navigate palace life with proper etiquette and formal behavior, Isabella remained refreshingly unpredictable. She would disappear into the gardens to chase butterflies during important state functions, ask visiting dignitaries uncomfortable questions about their unusual hats, and once famously hid under a banquet table during a formal dinner, just to see what grown-ups' feet looked like when they were being serious. The other guards found Princess Isabella delightful but exhausting. She had a habit of appearing suddenly in corridors where she shouldn't be, asking endless questions about their weapons and uniforms, and trying to convince them to abandon their posts to help her with various adventures she had planned. Guard Thompson, she had said just last week to one of the younger soldiers, "I need you to help me catch the ghost that lives in the library tower." "Your Highness, I cannot leave my post," Thompson had replied, trying to maintain his serious demeanor, while suppressing a smile. But the ghost only comes out during guard duty hours, Isabella had protested with perfect 8-year-old logic. "If you don't help me now, we'll never catch him." Most of the guards had learned to redirect the young princess back to order. Tutors or the palace staff assigned to watch her, but they did so with fondness. Her enthusiasm and curiosity brought life to the sometimes stuffy palace atmosphere. Captain Blackwood, however, had managed to avoid any direct interaction with Princess Isabella during his 15 years of service. Their paths simply never crossed. During his official duties, and he preferred it that way, children, in his experience, were unpredictable variables that could disrupt even the most carefully planned security protocols. He had observed her from a distance. Of course, during state functions, he would see her fidgeting in her formal dress, making faces at her siblings when she thought no one was watching, or whispering questions to her mother during solemn ceremonies. She seemed pleasant enough, but Alexander was grateful that managing the youngest princess fell to other members of the palace staff. Alexander's military background had taught him the importance of order, structure, and predictability. Every morning he woke at exactly 5 o'clock, completed his physical training routine, inspected his uniform with meticulous care, and reviewed the day's security protocols. His meals were taken at precise times. His reports were filed with mathematical punctuality. His personal quarters were maintained with military precision. The palace staff respected him immensely, but they also found him somewhat intimidating. He never engaged in casual conversation, never shared personal stories, and never seemed to relax his formal bearing, even during quiet moments between duties. Some of the younger guards wondered if Captain Blackwood ever smiled or laughed when he was alone. His dedication to duty was absolute. During his 15 years of service, he had never taken a sick day, never requested special leave, and never shown the slightest sign of fatigue or frustration, no matter how long or challenging. His assignments he treated every threat assessment, every security briefing, and every protective detail with the same unwavering focus and professionalism. On this particular Tuesday morning, Alexander was conducting his usual inspection of the palace perimeter. When he noticed unusual activity in the east wing, servants were hurrying back and forth with worried expressions, and he could hear raised voices coming from the direction of the royal family's private quarters. As the head of palace security, it was his duty to investigate any disturbance that might affect the royal family's safety. He made his way toward the commotion, his military bearing commanding immediate attention from the palace staff he encountered. His polished boots clicked rhythmically against the marble floors, and his perfectly pressed uniform drew respectful nods from everyone he passed. What Alexander was about to discover would challenge everything he believed about duty, protocol, and the unbreakable rules that had governed his entire professional life. "What's the situation?" Alexander asked Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, who was wringing her hands anxiously outside the princess's chambers. "It's Princess Isabella, Captain," Mrs. Henderson replied, clearly distressed. "She's locked herself in her room and refuses to come out. She won't respond to her tutors, her mother, or even the king himself. The royal physician is concerned because she missed her breakfast, and now she's missing her morning lessons." Alexander frowned. Security concern involving any member of the royal family was serious, but this seemed more like a family matter than a security issue. Still, his training demanded that he assess the situation thoroughly. "How long has she been locked in there?" he asked. "Since dawn, Captain." "Nearly 4 hours now. The Queen has tried reasoning with her through the door, and the King even offered to cancel his morning appointments to spend time with her. Nothing has worked." Alexander could hear muffled voices coming from behind the heavy wooden door of the princess's chamber. He recognized the Queen's gentle but concerned tone, and occasionally a small voice would respond from inside, though he couldn't make out the words clearly. "Has anyone determined what caused this behavior?" Alexander inquired, his mind automatically running through potential security implications. Had someone frightened the child? Was there a threat they weren't aware of? Mrs. Henderson shook her head helplessly. "No one knows, Captain. Yesterday, she was perfectly normal, chattering about her writing lessons, excited about the new books that arrived from the royal library. This morning, she simply refused to unlock her door when her governess came to wake her." As Alexander stood there listening to the situation unfold, he realized this was the first time in his 15 years of service that he had been called upon to deal with Princess Isabella directly. The other royal children had never presented behavioral challenges that required security intervention. But the youngest princess had always been different. Through the heavy door, he could hear the Queen's voice growing more worried. "Isabella, darling, please tell Mother what's wrong. We just want to help you." There was a long pause, then a small voice replied, "I can't tell you, Mama. You'll think I'm being silly. You would never think you're silly, sweetheart. Please, just unlock the door so we can talk properly." "No," came the firm reply from inside. "I'm not coming out until someone listens to me, really listens to what I have to say." Alexander studied the situation with his tactical mind. This wasn't a tantrum or a simple act of defiance. It was something specific the child wanted. Something she felt she couldn't communicate through normal channels. In his military experience, when someone barricaded themselves in a position, it was usually because they felt cornered or unheard. The king appeared in the corridor, his face showing a mixture of frustration and concern. Several palace officials flanked him, all wearing expressions of barely concealed panic at this breach of royal routine. The morning's carefully planned schedule was falling apart, and important diplomatic meetings were being delayed. "Captain Blackwood," the king said, with relief upon seeing him. "Thank goodness. We have a situation that requires your expertise." Alexander saluted crisply. "Your Majesty, I understand Princess Isabella has secured herself in her chambers. Have there been any security concerns or threats that might have caused this behavior?" "None that we're aware of," the king replied, running his hand through his graying hair. "But she's been in there for hours, and we're running out of diplomatic solutions. The morning schedule is completely disrupted, and we have important visitors arriving this afternoon who were hoping to meet her." As they spoke, Alexander found himself studying the ornate door to the princess's room. It was solid oak, beautifully carved with fairy tale scenes, dragons, castles, and brave knights rescuing princesses. For the first time, he wondered what It might be like to be 8 years old, living in a palace where every moment of your day was scheduled, every meal was formal, every interaction was governed by centuries-old protocol. Have any attempts been made to override the lock? Alexander asked practically. The door locks from the inside with an old-fashioned bolt, Mrs. Henderson explained. We could force it open, but we're concerned about frightening her further. She's just a child, after all. The Queen approached them, her elegant face creased with worry. Captain Blackwood, I've heard wonderful things about your problem-solving abilities. Perhaps you might have some insight into how we can resolve this. Situation peacefully. Alexander felt the weight of expectation from the assembled royal family and palace staff. Everyone was looking to him for a solution, but this was far outside his area of expertise. He was trained to handle security threats, not to negotiate with 8-year-old princesses who had locked themselves in their bedrooms. Your Majesty? He said carefully, perhaps it would help if I could speak with the princess directly. Sometimes a fresh perspective can be useful in resolving standoffs. The king nodded eagerly. Yes, of course. Please, try whatever you think might work. Alexander approached the carved door, feeling strangely nervous for the first time in years. He was accustomed to facing armed enemies, navigating political intrigue, and managing complex security operations. But somehow, the prospect of talking to one small, upset princess seemed more daunting than any of those challenges. He knocked gently on the door, not with his usual authoritative rap, but with a softer, more respectful rhythm. "Princess Isabella," he said in his most formal voice. "This is Captain Blackwood of the Royal Guard. May I have a word with you?" There was complete silence from inside the room. Alexander waited patiently, aware that everyone in the corridor was holding their breath, waiting to see if the legendary discipline and authority of Captain Blackwood could succeed where parental love and royal commands had failed. After what felt like an eternity, a small voice came from behind the door. "Are you the guard who never smiles?" Alexander was taken aback by the question. He glanced at the assembled royal family and palace staff, all of whom were watching him with intense curiosity. "I am Captain Blackwood, Your Highness. I am responsible for your family's safety." "That's not what I asked," came the reply, with a hint of 8-year-old impatience. "Guard Thompson told me about you. Said you're the guard who never smiles, never laughs, and never breaks any rules. Is that true?" Alexander felt heat rising in his cheeks. He had never considered how his reputation might sound from a child's. "Perspective. Take my duties very seriously, Princess Isabella." "That's still not answering my question," she said, and Alexander could almost hear her crossing her arms stubbornly. "Do you ever smile?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Alexander realized that everyone in the corridor was waiting for his response, not just the princess, but the king, queen, and all the palace staff. For 15 years, he had built his reputation on being unflappable, emotionless, and perfectly professional. Now, an 8-year-old was asking him to examine something he had never really thought about. "When the situation calls for it, Your Highness," he said carefully. There was a long pause, then a small giggle from behind the door. "You don't know, do you? You actually don't know if you ever smile." Alexander felt something strange happening. Inside his chest, a mix of embarrassment and something that might have been amusement. This child had managed to point out something about himself that no one else had ever dared mention. "Princess Isabella," he said, deciding to try a different approach. "I understand you have something important you want to discuss. I'm here too." "Listen, you're just saying that because it's your job," she replied skeptically. "Everyone says they'll listen, but they don't really. They just wait for me to stop talking so they can tell me what I should do instead." Alexander was struck by the wisdom in her words. How many times had he done exactly that, pretended to listen, while actually just waiting for his turn to give orders or advice? "You're right," he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "I often do that. But I promise you, Princess Isabella, that if you're willing to talk to me, I will really listen to what you have to say." Another long silence followed. Alexander could hear whispered conversations behind him as the palace staff discussed this unprecedented situation. Never before had anyone seen Captain Blackwood engage in such a personal conversation, much less admit to a fault in his character. "Why should I believe you?" Isabella asked finally. "You don't even know me. You've been working here for forever, and you've never even tried to talk to me before." The accusation stung because it was completely accurate. Alexander realized that in his 15 years of protecting the royal family, he had treated Princess Isabella like a security concern too. Be managed rather than a person to be known. "You're absolutely right," he said, leaning closer to the door. "I've been working here for 15 years, and I've never properly introduced myself to you. That was wrong of me, and I apologize." He could hear movement behind the door, footsteps approaching closer to where he stood. "Are you really apologizing to me?" Isabella asked, her voice now just on the other side of the heavy oak. "Grown-ups don't usually apologize to children. As grown-up as Alexander replied. Should have taken the time to get to know you. Princess Isabella, you deserve better from the people who are supposed to protect and serve your family." The queen stepped forward, clearly moved by Alexander's unexpected display of humility and personal reflection. The king watched with fascination as his most rigid, disciplined guard revealed a side of himself that no one had ever seen before. "If I unlock this door," Isabella said slowly, "do you promise to really listen? Not just pretend to listen while thinking about your important guard things?" "I promise," Alexander said solemnly. "You have my word as a soldier and as someone who is sorry for not being a better friend to you all these years." There was another pause, then the sound of the heavy bolt being slowly drawn back. The door opened just a crack, and Alexander could see one bright blue eye peering out at him through the gap. "You look different when you're not being all stiff." "And scary," Isabella observed. "Your face is softer." Alexander realized she was right. Without conscious thought, his rigid military posture had relaxed slightly. The stern expression he usually wore had softened into something more approachable. "May I come in so we can talk properly?" he asked gently. Isabella considered this for a moment, then opened the door wider. "You can come in, but only you. Everyone else has to wait outside." The king started to protest, but Alexander held up. "A hand, your majesty, if I may. Perhaps the princess needs to feel heard by someone who isn't family or staff. Sometimes an outside perspective can help." The king nodded reluctantly, though his face showed he wasn't entirely comfortable with the arrangement. "Very well, Captain, but please, find out what's troubling our daughter." As Alexander stepped into Princess Isabella's room for the first time, he was amazed by what he saw. The space was filled with books, art supplies, collections of interesting rocks and feathers, and drawings covering every available surface. It was the room of a curious, creative, intelligent child, not the frivolous playroom he might have expected. Isabella closed the door behind him and turned to face him with serious eyes. "Now," she said with the gravity of someone much older, "then Aid, I need to tell you about the problem that nobody wants to hear about." Alexander looked around the room with new eyes, taking in details he never would have noticed during a routine security sweep. Isabella's drawings weren't typical princess pictures of flowers and castles. They were detailed maps, diagrams of the palace layout, and sketches of people in various uniforms. Some showed guards at their posts, others depicted servants going about their daily duties. "You're very observant," Alexander said. Genuinely impressed by the sophistication of her artwork, Isabella shrugged, but looked pleased by the compliment. "Everyone thinks I'm just playing when I walk around the palace, but I'm actually paying attention. I see things that grown-ups miss because they think children don't notice important stuff." "Hey." She led him to a small table where several drawings were spread out. Alexander could see that they were detailed observations of palace life, guards changing shifts, servants carrying messages, visitors being escorted through various corridors. "What I need to tell you," Isabella said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "is about the man who doesn't belong here." Alexander's military training kicked in immediately. "What man?" "When did you see him? That's the problem," Isabella said, frustration clear in her voice. "I tried to tell Mama yesterday, and she said I was just making up stories. I tried to tell Papa this morning, and he said, I watched too many adventure books, and I'm seeing mysteries that aren't there." She picked up one of her drawings and handed it to Alexander. It showed a man in servant's clothing. But Isabella had noted several details that seemed odd. Shoes that were too expensive for a servant. Hands that were too soft for manual labor. And a way of walking that suggested military training. "Where did you see this man?" Alexander asked, his voice becoming more serious. "3 different times in the past week," Isabella replied. "The first time he was in the corridor outside the throne room during Papa's morning meetings. He was dressed like one of the message carriers, but he wasn't carrying any messages. He kept looking around like he was memorizing everything." Alexander studied the drawing more carefully. Isabella had captured details that even trained security personnel might miss: the way the man held his shoulders, the careful way he positioned himself to observe without being noticed. "The second time," Isabella continued, "I saw him in the servants' quarters. He was talking to Cook about delivering supplies, but Cook told me later that she had never seen him before and didn't know what supplies he was talking about. And the third time," Alexander prompted, feeling a cold certainty growing in his stomach. Isabella picked up another drawing. "Yesterday evening, during the royal dinner, he was one of the servers, but he spent more time watching the guards and exits than he did serving food. Look at this." She pointed to a detail in her drawing that made Alexander's blood run cold. The man was wearing a ring that Isabella had carefully documented. It showed a symbol that Alexander recognized from his military intelligence training. "Princess Isabella," Alexander said carefully, "this symbol you've drawn on his ring. You certain this is what you saw?" "Absolutely certain," she replied with confidence. "I'm very good at remembering details. That's why I got so upset when everyone said I was just imagining things. I know what I saw, and I know it's important, but nobody believes me because I'm just a kid." Alexander knelt down, so he was at eye level with Isabella. The symbol she had drawn was associated with a revolutionary group that had been making threats against monarchies throughout Europe. Intelligence reports had suggested they might attempt to infiltrate royal households, but there had been no concrete evidence until now. "Princess Isabella, I believe you," Alexander said solemnly. "What you've observed is extremely important, and you were absolutely right to be concerned. The adults who dismissed your observations made a serious mistake." Isabella's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Really? You don't think I'm just a silly little girl with too much imagination?" "I think you're one of the most observant and intelligent people I've ever met," Alexander replied honestly. "Your attention to detail and your ability to notice things that don't belong could save lives." Isabella wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "So what do we do now? How do we catch the bad man?" Alexander stood up, his mind already racing through security protocols and threat assessments. But he realized that Isabella deserved to be included in the solution, not just dismissed now that her information had been taken seriously. "We need to alert the palace security immediately," he said. "But Princess Isabella, I need you to do something very important for me." "What?" she asked eagerly. "I need you to stay in your room for the rest of the day while we investigate this threat. Can you do that? It's not punishment, it's because you're the only person who can identify this man, and I need to keep you safe until we can locate him." Isabella nodded seriously. "I can do that. But Captain Blackwood?" "Yes, Princess?" "After you catch the bad man, will you come back and tell me what happened? Everyone always protects me from knowing about dangerous things, but I want to understand. I want to learn how to help keep my family safe." Alexander felt something shift inside his chest. A warmth and respect for this remarkable little girl, who had probably prevented a serious threat to the royal family through her careful observations and persistence. "I promise I'll come back and tell you everything," he said. "And Princess Isabella, thank you. What you've done today. It takes real courage to keep trying when no one believes you." Isabella smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen since entering her room. "Does this mean we're friends now, Captain Blackwood?" Alexander surprised himself by smiling back, a real, warm smile that transformed his entire face. "Yes, Princess Isabella. I would be honored to be your friend." Alexander prepared to leave the room to coordinate the security response. He realized that this 8-year-old princess had not only potentially saved the royal family from a serious threat, but it also taught him something important about listening, believing in people, and the courage it takes to persist when everyone around you thinks you're wrong. Alexander opened the door to find the royal family and palace staff still gathered anxiously in the corridor. The king stepped forward immediately, his face full of concern and curiosity. "Captain Blackwood, what did you discover? Is Isabella all right?" Alexander's expression was grave as he addressed the assembled group. "Your Majesty, Princess Isabella is perfectly fine. But we have a serious security situation that requires immediate attention. I need to speak with you privately, along with the Queen and my security team." The Queen moved closer, her maternal instincts clearly alarmed. "What kind of security situation? Does it involve Isabella?" "She is not in immediate danger," Alexander assured her. "But her observations have uncovered a potential threat to the entire royal family. I need to coordinate a response immediately." Within minutes, Alexander had assembled his top security personnel in the king's private study. He spread Isabella's drawings on the large mahogany desk and explained what the princess had observed. Over the past week, a revolutionary infiltrator breathed Lieutenant Morrison, Alexander's second-in-command, and an 8-year-old princess spotted him when our entire security apparatus missed him. "How is that possible?" the king asked. Clearly shaken by the revelation that danger had been walking freely through his palace, Alexander felt a flush of professional embarrassment, but answered honestly. "Princess Isabella moves through the palace differently than we do, Your Majesty. She observes people and details that we might overlook because we're focused on standard security protocols. She noticed behavioral inconsistencies that suggested this man didn't belong." The Queen sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs. "To think that we dismissed her concerns as childish imagination, we could have." "Your Majesty," Alexander interrupted gently, "there's no point in dwelling on what might have happened. Princess Isabella's persistence and courage have given us the opportunity to address this threat before any harm was done." Lieutenant Morrison was studying the drawings with professional admiration. "The detail in these sketches is extraordinary. She's noted everything from the way he walks to the type of shoes he wears. This is better intelligence than most of our trained agents provide." "What's our next step?" the king asked. Alexander had already formulated a plan. "We need to quietly identify and locate this individual without alerting him that we're aware of his presence. I suggest we use Princess Isabella's drawings to brief all security personnel, then conduct a systematic but discreet search of the palace." "How long will this take?" The Queen inquired. "If he's still in the palace, we should be able to locate him within a few hours." "However," Alexander paused. "Considering the implications, however what, Captain?" the king prompted. "If Princess Isabella is correct about his ring bearing the symbol of the Revolutionary Brotherhood, this individual is likely part of a larger network. Capturing him may only be the first step in addressing a broader threat. The next few hours were tense as Alexander coordinated the most thorough security sweep in the palace's history. Guards who had worked the same posts for years suddenly found themselves scrutinizing every servant, every delivery person, every individual who moved through the palace corridors. Meanwhile, Alexander had kept his promise to Isabella. He returned to her room to update her on the situation, finding her sitting at her small desk, drawing additional details she had remembered. "I've been thinking about the bad man," she said, as soon as Alexander entered. "I remembered something else. Yesterday, when I saw him serving dinner, he kept looking at the clock on the wall. Not like someone who was bored, but like he was timing something." Alexander felt another chill of realization. "Princess Isabella, do you remember what time he kept looking at the clock?" "It was exactly 7:30 when I first noticed him checking the time. Then he looked again at 7:45 and again at 8 o'clock. Very precise, like he was following a schedule." Alexander's mind raced through the implications. Revolutionary agents often worked with precise timing to coordinate with outside accomplices. The man's behavior suggested he had been gathering intelligence according to a specific timeline. "You've done it again," Alexander told Isabella with genuine admiration. That information could be crucial to understanding his mission. Isabella beamed with pride, then grew serious again. "Captain Blackwood, I want to ask you something important." "Of course, Princess. What is it?" Isabella stood up and faced him. With the same gravity she might use for a state ceremony, I want to help catch the bad man. Not just by giving you information, but by actually helping." Alexander started to shake his head, but Isabella held up her hand in a gesture that was surprisingly commanding for an 8-year-old. "Let me finish," she said firmly. "I know you're going to say it's too dangerous and that children shouldn't be involved in grown-up problems. But I'm the only one who knows exactly what this man looks like, and I'm the only one who has seen him in different disguises." Alexander opened his mouth to explain why her involvement would be impossible, but Isabella continued speaking. "I'm not asking to chase bad guys or carry weapons or do anything dangerous, but if you're searching the palace and you need someone to identify him quickly, I could help. I could stay safe with lots of guards around me, but I could be there when you need to know if you've found the right person." Alexander found himself in an unprecedented situation. In 15 years of military and security service, no one had ever challenged his authority or questioned his decisions. Certainly no child had ever made a strategic argument for their inclusion in a security operation, but Princess Isabella's logic was sound. She was indeed the only reliable witness who could identify the infiltrator in various disguises. "Princess Isabella," Alexander said slowly, "what you're suggesting goes against every protocol and procedure that guides palace security." Isabella's face fell slightly, but she maintained her determined posture. "However," Alexander continued, and her expression brightened, "your suggestion has significant tactical merit. If we can ensure your complete safety while utilizing your identification abilities, it could make the difference between success and failure of this operation." Isabella's eyes widened with excitement. "Really? You'll let me help?" Alexander made a decision that would have shocked anyone who knew his reputation for rigid rule-following. "Princess Isabella, I'm going to do something I have never done in my entire career. I'm going to break protocol because a very wise 8-year-old has made a better strategic recommendation than any of my trained officers." Isabella stepped forward, and, in a voice that carried surprising authority for someone so young, said the words that would change everything. "Captain Blackwood, I command you to let me help save my family." For the first time in his 15-year career, Alexander Blackwood found himself unable to follow the chain of command, because the most compelling, logical, and courageous order he had ever received had just come from the youngest princess in the kingdom. Alexander stared at Princess Isabella for a long moment, realizing that her simple command had just shattered 15 years of absolute obedience to military hierarchy. She had not asked him to break protocol, she had commanded it, and somehow, that made all the difference. "Your Highness," he said formally, then smiled. "Your command is acknowledged and accepted." Within an hour, Alexander had arranged the most unusual security operation in palace history. Princess Isabella sat in a specially secured observation room that had been hastily set up with one-way glass panels overlooking the main corridors. She was surrounded by 4 of Alexander's most trusted guards, with direct communication to the search teams throughout the palace. The king and queen had initially been horrified by the idea of involving their youngest daughter in a security operation. But Alexander had presented Isabella's tactical argument with such conviction that they reluctantly agreed, provided she remained completely protected at all times. "Remember," Princess Alexander said into his communication device, "if you see the man from your drawings, you just tell us immediately. You don't need to do anything else except identify him." Isabella's voice came back through the speaker with barely contained excitement. "I understand, Captain Blackwood. I'm ready." The search proceeded methodically through the palace. Every servant, every delivery person, every individual in the building was quietly observed and evaluated. Alexander's teams had Isabella's drawings memorized, but they knew that the princess's trained eye would be crucial for a positive identification. For 2 hours, they found nothing. Alexander began to wonder if the infiltrator had already completed his mission and left the palace. But then, as the afternoon shift change began, Isabella's voice crackled through the communication system. "Captain Blackwood, I see him. He's in the south corridor, dressed as one of the afternoon maintenance workers." Alexander felt his heart rate increase. "Are you certain, Princess?" "Absolutely certain. Same face, same way of walking, and he's wearing the ring with the bad symbol. But Captain, he's heading toward the throne room, and he's carrying a toolbox that looks too heavy for regular maintenance tools." Alexander was already moving, coordinating his response teams through hand signals and whispered commands. The south corridor led directly to the throne room, where the king would be meeting with foreign ambassadors in less than an hour. All units converge on South Corridor, but maintain distance. Do not alert the subject, Princess Isabella. Keep observing and tell us everything you see. Through the communication system, Alexander could hear Isabella's calm, clear voice providing a running commentary. He stopped at the service door near the throne room. He's looking around to make sure no one is watching, and now he's opening his toolbox. Captain Blackwood, those aren't tools in there. It looks like ... like some kind of device with wires. Alexander's blood ran cold. An explosive device near the throne room during a diplomatic meeting would be catastrophic. He signaled his teams. To move into position is putting the device behind a decorative pillar, Isabella continued. He's working very quickly, like he's done this before. Captain, he keeps checking that same clock again. I think he's following a very specific schedule. Alexander realized they were witnessing the final phase of what had probably been weeks or months of planning. The infiltrator had used his time in the palace to scout locations, timing, and security patterns. Princess Isabella, Alexander said quietly, I need you to keep watching, but be ready to move to the secure room if I give the command. I understand, she replied, her voice steady, despite the dangerous situation unfolding before her. Alexander and his team moved into position. The infiltrator was so focused on his work that he didn't notice the guards, quietly surrounding him until Alexander stepped out from behind a corner. Stop what you're doing and step away from the device, Alexander commanded. His weapon drawn but held low to avoid causing panic among any palace staff who might witness the confrontation. The infiltrator spun around, his eyes darting quickly between Alexander and the other guards who had emerged from their positions. For a moment, it looked like he might try to run, but then his shoulders sagged in defeat as he realized he was completely surrounded. Hands where I can see them, Alexander ordered. Step away from your toolbox slowly. The man complied, but his expression remained defiant. As Alexander's team secured the suspect and called for the bomb disposal experts, Isabella's voice came through the communication system once more. Captain Blackwood, you got him. Is everyone safe? Everyone is safe. Princess Isabella, Alexander replied, unable to keep the pride and relief out of his voice. Thanks to your excellent observations and your courage in helping us today. Within minutes, the bomb disposal team had safely removed and disarmed the device. It had been a sophisticated explosive that would have caused massive damage to the throne room and anyone inside it. The foreign ambassadors who were scheduled to meet with the king would have been killed or seriously injured, potentially causing an international incident. As the immediate crisis was resolved and the palace was declared secure, Alexander made his way back to Isabella's observation room. He found her sitting quietly, looking suddenly very young and a bit overwhelmed by what had just happened. Princess Isabella, he said gently, you saved lives today. Your father, your family, and innocent people who would have been hurt by that terrible device. Isabella looked up at him with serious eyes. I'm glad we caught the bad man, but it's scary to think about what almost happened. Alexander knelt down beside her chair. It is scary. But what's important is that when you saw something wrong, you didn't give up trying to tell people about it. Even when the grown-ups didn't believe you at first, you kept insisting because you knew it was important. Will there be other bad people who try to hurt my family? Isabella asked quietly. Alexander considered how to answer this question honestly without frightening her unnecessarily. There might be, Princess. That's why people like me have jobs protecting your family. But what I learned today is that sometimes the best protection comes from people who pay attention, ask questions, and speak up when something doesn't seem right. Isabella nodded thoughtfully. So I should keep watching and noticing things. Yes, but more than that. You should keep being curious, keep asking questions, and keep trusting yourself when you think something is important. Those are gifts that will serve you well throughout your life, whether you're 8 years old or 80. The king and queen arrived at the observation room, both looking shaken but immensely proud of their youngest daughter. The queen swept Isabella into a fierce hug, while the king turned to Alexander with gratitude and amazement. "Captain Blackwood, I understand that you broke several protocols today by involving Isabella in the security operation." Alexander straightened, prepared to face whatever consequences his decision might bring. "Yes, Your Majesty. I take full responsibility for that choice." The king studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Good. It was the right decision, and it probably saved lives. I'm promoting you to Chief of Royal Security. I want you to work with Isabella to develop new observation protocols that take advantage of her unique perspective and skills." Isabella's eyes widened with excitement. "Really? I get to help with real security work?" "You get to help keep your family safe," the king replied, "which is exactly what you did today." As they left the observation room together, Alexander realized that his encounter with Princess Isabella had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. She had taught him that sometimes the most important orders come from the most unexpected sources, and that true strength sometimes means being willing to break the rules when something more important is at stake years later. When Princess Isabella had grown into a wise and capable young woman who would eventually become one of the kingdom's most effective intelligence officers, people would tell stories about the day an 8-year-old princess gave a command to the most disciplined guard in the realm, and how that single moment of courage and trust had saved the royal family and changed both of their lives forever. Alexander never forgot the lesson that Isabella had taught him that day, that real leadership isn't about following orders blindly, but about knowing when to listen to wisdom, no matter what age it comes from. And Isabella never forgot that sometimes the most important thing you can do is speak up when you know something is wrong, even if all the grown-ups around you think you're just a child with an overactive imagination. From that day forward, Captain Alexander Blackwood was known not as the guard who never smiled, but as the protector who understood that the greatest security came from paying attention to the people around him, especially the youngest ones, who often saw the world with the clearest eyes of all.